Commutifi presents Between the Lines with Andy Keaton. Each week, we explore the challenging issues transportation demand management professionals face on their journey to transition commuters from driving alone to more sustainable, shared, and active commuting habits. Be sure to subscribe to hear next week's episode and check out our exclusive commuter playlists on Spotify. This is Between the Lines with Andy Keaton.
Hi, everyone, and welcome aboard to the Between the Lines podcast. I'm Andy Keaton, and today we are joined by a coworker of mine, actually, Esteban Sanchez. Esteban is the co-founder and CTO of Commutifi. He's an entrepreneur coming from a software engineering background, and he's passionate about the combination of data, which we'll be talking about quite a bit today, product innovation, and creativity to solve real-world problems in technology. At Commutify, he's been applying a data-driven approach to the transportation ecosystem to help organizations gain a deeper understanding of their commuters and drive sustainable change through TDM or transportation demand management programs. And Commutify's technology is currently used by various cities, governments, Fortune 500 companies, consultants, and TMAs across North America. So I think, if you've been listening to a lot of our episodes, you may have heard me mention Commutify here and there, but today we're going to dive a little bit more deeply into it. But Esteban, thanks for being on.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I mean, I've been watching the episodes for a while, and now I can participate.
And I'm excited to have you on because I think this is an interesting conversation. We talk a lot about kind of in every episode, the idea of data and, thinking about kind of the system from a quantifiable way. But now we're actually going to dive deep into it. So today we're talking about why commuter data specifically will help save the planet. So I think what might be good for some of our listeners is for you to tell us a little bit about what commuter data is, what goes into it, and how it's collected.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I love the topic of data, and I think that's very central to all of these episodes that we've been hearing, because that's what commuter data is. When we talk about e-bikes, when we talk about shuttle system, when we talk about transit system, every single system out there that moves user from their home to the office is part of commuter data. But it also goes beyond this. There's a lot of decisions that happen, there's a lot of realities. So when I think of commuter data, I think of really everything that happens in the decision making and in the journey between a home and an office. So that goes from every single mode of commute, from active commuting to driving, parking, public transit, to the behavioral reason why people make choices, the realities, the activities. Do you drop your kids to school? So for me, this is commuter data, the entire journey.
It's interesting. So I like that idea because you're getting into every little aspect of the commute. So how does this kind of accurate commuter data, really diving into every aspect of the commute, what can that tell us about a commuting system? Like, what can we learn from this?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's well, that's. I'll try to be brief because we can learn so much. Commuting is at the base, and transportation in general is the base of all our cities. How people move around, how we design cities, just where our buildings built, where different types of amenities available. So when we look at commuter data, we can tell first how efficient is the system, like how fast can people move around, how fast can people get to work. And when I say fast, we're not looking at maximizing individual time, but at least the collective time that our
Mm-hmm.
society can move to and from work. We can understand better the cost. I mean, how much are people spending to commute? A very expensive drive, a very expensive park, versus perhaps a very cheap bike ride. So understanding the cost of the system from an individual, but also from a society point of view or an organization. I think the carbon impact, so we can better understand, assess if we really want to save the planet. We need to start there. And then there's just a lot of other metrics. People are, stressed by their daily commute. We hear that all the time on the news. There's health impact. There's, happiness impact. So really, at the root of commuter data, it's understanding all these impacts on people and how we can start improving them.
So you talk about kind of the uh, let's start at the individual level because you talked about how this commuter data can help the individual, but it can also help at the organization level. We'll start at the individual. What can a particular commuter, what kind of benefits can a particular individual gain from having this data out there in the world?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think if you were to ask me that 100 years ago or 50 years ago, I would say probably very little because the amount of options you had in your journey to work was very little. People either lived closer to their work or had a single mode of commute. It's been at that time it was the rise of the automobile and cars. If we look today, there's countless of options. I mean, just look at the podcast and all the guests you've received. These are all amazing commute options. In a single market, when you look at micromobility, you probably have 10 options. You then add transit, you add micro transit, you add multimodal journey, meaning that you could, drive to the train and then complete your journey during a train. So it's just for a user, it's too many options for him to understand himself. So he needs good commuter data so that he can make informed decisions that will improve his own life. So we talked about certain metrics earlier. It's about how does he maximize his own commute and how can we make it simpler for the individual to make the right choice on a daily basis because the reality of each day
Mm.
is different. It might be sunny, it might be rainy. He might need to have a meeting after work, he might not, he might be in a hurry. So, how can we make the best decision every day? That's what it brings to commuters, I think.
So it actually gives them that information. So yeah,
Yeah,
they can actually make the informed choice instead of just knowing things are around, maybe knowing what's best for them or best in a situation or something.
yeah, exactly. Everyone loves to save money, save time. I mean, it's
That's true. And increasingly save emissions, hopefully.
exactly.
Um, okay, so that's the individual. What about at an organization level? So let's think, it could be an employer, it could be a TMA, a city, maybe a commercial real estate building. What can this organizational wide or citywide kind of benefit be from this commuter data?
I think that's a vast question, and I'd love to split it into three segments.
Go for
There's,
it.
if we think of employers, what can commuter data bring them? Well, first, I think the employers have been increasingly involved in their employee commuting, just from the fact that they often have parking at their facilities. That's already an involvement. And more, we've seen as hiring gets competitive, employers are trying to offer benefits, help their employees come back to work. That's even when I'm looking at the post-COVID surveys on employees returning to work. It's one of the top requests from employees is I want my employer to support me if I'm to commute back. Otherwise, I'll stay at home. So I
Yeah.
think for employers, as they're looking at their benefits, as they're looking at their parking usage, it's a way to make sure that they can offer benefits that will really help their employees and at the same time hopefully improve their sustainability and decrease their cost. Every employer is of course looking to improve their bottom line, and there's ways when it's well designed to do all of these three things together. That's from an employer point of view. When you look at a city, the goals are different. An organization, a city, they're looking to maximize what's the common good of everyone. So how does the average speed gets better? How does the average coverage get better? How can we be more equitable? It's important not to just have a few users who can commute very quick, but to make sure we can cover the suburbs, cover low income neighborhoods, really have a good coverage of every citizen and helping them move around. So for cities, I would say it's understanding where are transit desert, like where don't you have access to current network? Where are people who need help commuting better? Where can we be more equitable? Where can we be more efficient in our operations? So that's really where I see the city angle of this data. And I'd love to bring another angle which you haven't discussed
Go for
is
it.
the mobility operator. Like if we think of a rideshare provider, a shuttle provider, a transit network. All of these are also trying to design a system that that will fit the demands of their users. But if they don't have this data, they can't forecast, operationally, how many vehicles do they need? Where do they need to offer a service? At what cost are users willing to pay for it? So really, I think having better commuter data can also help all these service providers offer the right service for the right area. So that's really, it's the same data. It's just there's so many levels to it.
Right. It's just applying it to the right problem. I like that. I like that it's got that multi-use kind of functionality. So yeah, I mean that's interesting. And one thing I think that we're going to see more and more across the whole TDM kind of sphere is the use of data as a tool to help plan. I think that was kind of a theme that you talked about. Like an employer can plan for the right ways to spend money to
Yep.
maximize their ROI. An operator can plan the right routes. A city can plan the right infrastructure. So let's get into that a bit. First, I want to talk maybe about today. Why is it difficult to measure ROI of these potential TDM solutions today? Why is that hard to do? And how does this make it hard for organizations and cities and operators to invest their funds in the right way?
Yeah, it's kind of taking a parallel first. What I always find very captivating is how little data and little measurement of the return on investment we do right now in transportation. You see massive $1 million projects being invested without being able to predict what's happening right now and what will happen after I do it. And we would never see that in other industry. If you imagine the financial industry or buildings, no one would replace a whole, let's say, water management system in a building for $1 million without understanding water use today and what is the water use of the new system. And that's
Sure.
just one example amongst many. But in transportation, that's what we're doing. We're putting perhaps a new shuttle, or we're putting a new transportation subsidy, but we don't have the metrics to say what's the before, what's the after. And the reason we don't have them is, of course, we know if we're putting, let's say, a new shuttle system for an enterprise, we know what the cost of that new shuttle system is. We know what the energy efficiency. We know all of these metrics. What we don't know is what will be the adoption. How many users will actually use this system? What modes were these users doing before? So what will be the saving from the old system to the new? What other kind of system interact with this one? Mobility doesn't act alone. You have the
Mm-hmm.
city infrastructure that plays with state infrastructure that plays with what an employer puts in place. And in the end, with all of these different infrastructure, it remains an individual choice. And that's really what complexify this system amongst others. It's not one system. It's five, six, seven interconnected system where you can't predict the most basic thing because you can't predict user choice. And that's really
Mm.
what's unique. Commuting is a choice of every commuter in the end. It's not like a water management system that you put in the building and everyone will use. That's very easy to compare before and after. So yeah, that really,
Interesting.
I'm not sure if I answered your question on this one, but
No, I mean you kind of did. You said, why is it hard for an employer or an organization to measure this? It's
yeah,
because uh, maybe they're not at all right now. That's why it's hard because it's just not happening. But yeah, I mean it makes sense. They can't. You can't just measure one thing. I think what is often maybe seen as, oh, we put in this transit line and they had 1,000 new riders, so it was really successful. But were those 1,000 riders bikers before, or were they driving alone, or were they taking a different transit line? Like, how did that actually impact? And that's what
yeah,
you're kind of getting
exactly.
at, right?
And it gets into also, we talked about different metrics and different success a bit earlier. It's if you took 1,000 people biking and they're the one adopting your transit line. If you just look at the metrics from your new transit line, you'll think it's a success. You have 1,000 people using it every day. But if you've just removed 1,000 bikes from the street, it's actually a failure because these bikes were even more sustainable, taking less of our city infrastructure, less cost to run. So it's really about what was the transition, where are
Hmm.
people coming from, and where are they coming at now. And also, when you're looking at that, perhaps you save them time, but is it as sustainable as before? Is it as cost efficient? There's just so many variables, and I don't want to talk about Commutify, but that's really why we've developed the Commuter Score as a how can you have a single metric that can really look at these different variables and tell you, is it better than it is before or is it worse? And how can we all have the same language in this interconnected system?
No, I mean, I think actually that's an interesting point to bring up. Maybe if you can just quickly explain what this commuter score idea is, because it might be a good way to give an understanding of kind of that baseline of where people are.
Yeah, definitely. And it's been, I'd say, many years ago when we were designing the score, it was a very new idea that no one understood. Why do you need a score? Why can't you just look at the time? And today, with the evolving realities, the amount of services, it's becoming more widely accepted that we need these common metrics. So the score we've developed is based on the cost efficiency of a commute, the time efficiency, the carbon efficiency, and also considering more variables around equity, health impact, and all of these those different metrics that you have in a commute. And the goal is really to be able to see if I'm commuting a certain way today, how good is my score? But then, if I could take other modes of commute, if I could shift from perhaps driving alone to taking a train, how would it improve these different metrics? Some might be better, some might be worse, but overall, would I get a better score once it's well balanced to, use these different metrics? And that's really the key. It's, do we have a way to measure improvement? Because if you can't start changing things from an individual or an organization point of view.
So yeah, so what it sounds like is whether it's the commuter score or something else, this commuter data is kind of creating that common language we can talk about when we're talking about is one commute better than another, and you know,
Yeah,
kind of
exactly.
going on
It's
from there. Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. So we've okay. So let's assume then that we actually can collect this data because it sounds like we can, um, and I guess I know we can. And then let's talk about what that can benefit, uh, how that can benefit us as commuters and as an organization. So you originally mentioned that right now it's hard to really kind of tile the pieces together, and a lot of organizations aren't doing that when planning TDM programs. So how can actually taking the time to understand the commuter data, understand current patterns, how can that help us understand and then also maybe model the future?
yeah, I think it's first there's kind of taking commuter data. I think we can increasingly take more and more data. There's a lot of these systems which are very complex infrastructure system that we don't have data yet if we think of some transit infrastructure, some parking. So what's good is we're seeing more of that data intake arrive as all of these systems get connected. Um, and then as we have this data, it's important to predict. There's really a few things to predict. One, how will new system help move more people more efficiently? That's what a lot of the or transit our transit agencies and a lot of our other mobility operators are trying to predict. And then there's a really important second aspect is the human side of things. I mean, data alone, metrics alone doesn't matter if you can't predict the human behavior. And that's
Hmm.
again, it's the same thing if you think of stocks. The rule of stocks are very clear. It's you purchase, you sell, and it impacts the price. But why stocks are unpredictable and why you and I are not billionaires today is because no one can actually predict how people interact with stocks, how people buy and sell. Even the top Wall Street analysts can't. So if we bring that back to transportation, that's the same challenge. We have systems which we can plan for, but then we have people who will interact. So when I think of predicting, um, and some things we're working with and thinking with our teams is how can we use all of this data, the score, the metrics we've collected, how can we bring that alongside some behavioral data? So knowing that you perhaps, Andy, you like to get your daily haircut before going to the, the office
I
just to
really need
trim the
to.
Yeah, just to trim slight hairs. So how can we predict like these behavioral data? So you like to walk because you like to stop at that hairdresser. Someone else perhaps drive 5 miles, drop their kid, get to work. So how can we take that? How can we take the reality of it's summer, it's winter? Um, so just all these variables, and now say, okay, we know we have this new system. What is the likelihood of adoption? Are we looking at transitioning 100 user to it, 1,000 user? Um, and that's where eventually you can start looking at AI, at machine learning, which are really built for this predictability of a multitude of variables in a very complex context. If you can start looking at the history and how users with similar variables reacted to change, you can really start to predict what the future can look like. So really, I mean, I've said a lot there, but simply is if we can take in all the data, but also the history of how people change their behavior over time, we can start to look towards the future and understand how people may change their behavior. It will always be a prediction, but hopefully with good data, we can validate it over time.
Sure. So that was, I mean, that was kind of my last question you started getting at was where does the future of commuter data go? And when we're talking about predicting behavior in commuting and in transportation, is this something that's happening today? Is this 5 years from now, 10 years from now? Like, what does this future look like? Talking to you as a data person, as a technology person, what do you think?
Yeah, I think it's first it's about having better connected data, as I hinted it earlier. When we look at the future, think of your smart home, by example. We're starting to see, connected thermostat, connected fridges, connected oven and dishwasher. I mean, I'm not sure if it's of any use, but we're getting all our system connected. Same thing with transportation. We're not there yet. I think we need another 5 years for every system to be connected, and that's just because a lot of it has high infrastructure cost of adding the right license plate recognition camera to track parking usage or adding the right system to collect the data point. They're all around us, and they're increasingly being uh, modernized to have this data. So that's really where I see the first big challenge of the future is getting all of this data collected. The second big challenge you see is now that we have all of this data in 20 different systems, is how do we bring it into one system that actually
Mm-hmm.
creates usable data for whoever needs it. And from there, I think we can really start to do prediction, do a real time measurement of the return on investment, or do some really what I call the really fun stuff. So I think we're probably 5 years out of having this system that can really connect everything, and then there's a decade of innovation that can be unlocked from again artificial intelligence to just smarter, more personalized system for individuals.
So if you're a transit agency or a city or someone who's putting in infrastructure, you should be thinking about this now. The technology is there from what I hear. It's just really implementing it. And the sooner we can get this stuff implemented, we can start doing some really interesting things, it sounds like.
Yeah, exactly. It's modernizing our infrastructure, a way to think. Could open a whole other door about also modernizing the privacy frameworks, and there's a
Hmm.
lot of there's a lot of steps that need to happen to have this data not only collected, exchangeable, protecting the privacy of the user, but also being useful to organization. So this is really what I think is accelerating, and it's really hopeful to see all these agencies and all these systems now opening slowly their data to their users to being exchanged between system, and that's where the future is. It's many interconnected system talking to each other.
I like it. I'm excited about that future. All
It
right,
is
5 years from now, we'll get you back on the podcast and we'll see if it worked.
perfect.
Um,
I'll show you some nice graphs and prediction about that.
Perfect. Okay, so I mean, this has been a really good conversation. Uh, like we do every week, I think it's good to kind of just summarize. You've talked about a lot, so in a few sentences, just kind of tell us that high level. What's the most important thing about commuter data? Why will it help save the planet?
Yeah, if I was to summarize that in 20 seconds, I would say we have so many solutions out there, so many people working towards solution, but we can't start changing what we can't measure. So it's why commuter data will save the planet. It won't in its own, but it will enable every single other solution to save the planet. And it will empower them to do so much more efficiently. And I think that's really where commuter data needs to be.
I like it. Form that ground level to get everything else going.
Exactly.
Well, Esteban, I mean, this has been a really great conversation. I have one more question for you, but before that, I just want to thank all of our listeners and viewers once again for tuning in. If you haven't yet, make sure you subscribe to us wherever you listen to podcasts: Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, kind of wherever you listen to it. And take the time to watch our videos as well on YouTube. Give us a like, a rating; it really does help. And definitely subscribe to our email list. It's growing. It's great to see. Go to betweenthelines.io to do that. And we actually send out emails every week with updates from our guests and just a little more information to keep you updated on the conversation. So we have one last question for you, Esteban. And you brought a good one today. As everyone knows by now, or if you're new to listening, we've been building a commuter music playlist on Spotify to finish out your commute for the week. You might need some music. So we've been filling that with our guests' favorite songs and songs they like to listen to when they're commuting. Esteban, what do you have to add to the playlist this week?
Yeah, definitely. Usually I'm a big listener of just playlists, but I wanted to bring something that's first from Quebec and good to start the day. So I chose, it's called Ça se danse from King Melrose, which is, I would translate to "it can be dense." It's a weird translation, but talking about life, just it can rain or it can, it can be a nice or rainy day or doesn't matter. You can enjoy it. So I think that's a good way to start the day. It's just every work day is good. It's just go with a good attitude.
And this playlist, I really like what's happening with it because it's showing the diversity of the TDM world. We've got some French songs. We were getting songs, from every genre. I think at this point,
Yeah, I
I don't
think
know if there's
no
any
one wants
coherence.
to. Yeah, no one wants to pick the popular song. Everyone's trying to bring some unique piece to the playlist, which is really
Yeah,
fun.
bringing their own personality. I really like it. So yeah, I mean, I think that's a good addition. I'll have to listen to it. I'm trying to learn French myself now that I've moved to Montreal. So maybe that'll be how I learn it.
Listen to it over and over.
Exactly. I'll know those words really well. Perfect. Well, Esteban, thanks for being on. It was great having you, and thanks everyone for listening.
Thank you, Andy.
Thanks for joining us on this week's episode of Between the Lines with Andy Keaton. Be sure to subscribe to hear next week's episode and check out our exclusive commuter playlists on Spotify.